Welcome to another exciting episode of Bats, Balls and Banter, your ultimate destination for all things cricket. Cricket is more than just a game, it's a passion that unites millions across the globe. Here at Bats, Balls and Banter, we're dedicated to bringing you closer to the action, the stories and the personalities that make cricket the fascinating sport that it is. I'm your host, Kevin Pattenden. Grab your bat, hold on to your balls, settle in, and let's dive into the banter. So on today's episode of Bats, Balls and Banter, we're thrilled to welcome Richard Cox, a figure whose influence on cricket spans coaching, administration and international development. Richard, who has played minor counties for Hertfordshire and gone on to hold key roles including the CEO of the Royal Dutch Cricket Board and regional manager for the ECB. His work has shaped cricket not only in England but in places as diverse as the Netherlands, Estonia and Cyprus. Currently serving as General Manager of Hertfordshire Cricket, High Performance Director for the Estonian Cricket Board and involved in various global cricketing initiatives, Richard's insights and experiences are sure to offer a unique perspective on the game we love. So, hi Richard and welcome to Bats, Balls and Banter.
Hi Kev, how you doing?
I'm really good, my friend, thank you very much indeed. And I'm just thinking about all the things I've got lined up for you here in this section of the Bats, Balls and Banter podcast, and I think we'll end up turning this into a trilogy. There's that much information to get through, but let's start somewhere. You know, you've had a fascinating journey in cricket, from CEO of the Royal Dutch Cricket Board, roles with the ECB, Cricket Shropshire, Herefordshire, I would think minor counties and coaching, and the list goes on. But what were the biggest challenges and highlights you've had in those diverse positions, would you say, at this stage?
The challenges would be probably first thing I probably need to say, Kev, is that somebody said to me a few years back that you're the luckiest man alive to have had 35 plus years in cricket. And I'll perhaps talk about some of those things. But in terms of the challenges, I suppose getting the first rung on the ladder back in 1989 when I hadn't played first-class cricket. I played a decent level of cricket. And in those days, that was a badge of honour to gain some employment in the game. And I became the fourth ever cricket development officer with Warwickshire County Cricket Club behind Notts, Essex and Surrey, I think it was. And all of those three were, huge counties at the time. And they were very much about growing the game, as we still are today, 35, 36 years on. But I suppose the first challenge for me was that, like many employments, the job was actually labelled for somebody else who was about to retire from first-class cricket, a guy called Jeff Tedston, who became director of sport, actually, at Warwick School, a very preeminent school in the West Midlands. He was retiring from the first-class game, and the county club thought that it would be a good move to have him as their cricket development officer. But they opened up the job application to, as you would today, countrywide at the time, and I was lucky enough to get through a selection process. So I suppose the first challenge there is what I've always called a grass ceiling, not a glass ceiling, a grass ceiling. Is how do we, those people that haven't perhaps been good enough to play at the top level, break through and create a career in the game when the perception is if you haven't been there, you certainly can't work in the game. And I think that's changed immeasurably over the years to the point where loads of people who've not played at the top level are now doing excellent jobs in the game. But that was my first challenge, Kev, was to break this aura of, well, who's this bloke? He hasn't done anything of any significance in the game. How can he be any good? And once
groundbreaking then, I would have thought, back in 89, because as you say, what definitely was prominent, you played county cricket at a first-class level, or international cricket if you were good enough for that. But then you were always going to be in line for the bowling coach or the team manager or the whatever. And if you hadn't played first-class cricket, then that just never entered anybody's head. So I would think nowadays, it's much more open and lots of analytics. And we'll come on to some of that of how you get into the game now. But back in '89, that'd be quite groundbreaking, I would have thought, Richard.
Yeah, I think it was. The first ever cricket development office in the country came from your neck of the woods, actually, Nottinghamshire. A guy called John Cope, who was my mentor, actually, when I first started, because there was only 4 of us. And I used to trek up and down to Trent Bridge an awful lot just to sit and listen to him. And what he gave in half a day or a day in just walking me through stuff was gold dust. And if it hadn't been for John, he's sadly no longer with us, but if it hadn't been for John, I'm not sure that I would have had the grounding that I actually needed in those early days, because I was a cricket development officer, but very much part of the city of Birmingham as well as the county, and I was surrounded by other sports development officers. And it's not to say cricket is too niche that you can't learn from other sports. Of course you can. But John had been there, seen it and done it, and Notts were ahead of the game by a country mile at that stage. At that
stage they would have been, yeah.
He was brilliant for me, really. So that was probably the first challenge at Warwickshire. And then obviously growing through the business over 22 years I was there in actual fact. To Director of Youth Cricket. I moved on to that in 1997 and then became Director of Cricket and Academy Director for the last sort of 6-7 years, operating up, as you've said, to management board level, which was fairly, even growth for me, I would say, but also it allowed me to see everything from the bottom of the game, really, to how a test match ground operated at the top level, and I grew with that. I thoroughly enjoyed my time there. I still go back to Edgbaston a lot. The challenges of moving as you do when you go through life, changing jobs and getting promoted, each time you have to step up. So there's always...
It comes with its own challenges. And so therefore, given that you were sort of black sheep, really, as we've just said, and I did know John, actually. John used to come down to Retford the odd time, so way back in the day, so I was aware of John.
Lovely man.
Yeah, very, very friendly, very personable, just a nice all-round guy, really, to be fair to him. But given that you were, like we say, a bit of a black sheep then, in the fact that you hadn't played the first-class cricket, did that bring its own challenges? Were you shunned because of that? Did people respect you less because of that? Or were they open to the new ideas you might be bringing in at that time?
I'd certainly say when I was working in and around the city of Birmingham with fellow sports development officers, I was as respected as the swimming development or the football development. I worked with some people who had also come out of the professional game into those roles, so professional swimmers, footballers and hockey players, all sorts of things. But I was treated on a par. I have to say, when I was working in and around Warwickshire, I definitely had to prove myself. But I didn't mind that, because it meant that you needed to live on the edge a little bit. And
I don't think that's a bad thing. I think you perform better if you know you're sort of on the edge. I couldn't coast at all. And every time I drove through those gates, and I still do to this day, feel immensely proud to have been part of something, certainly in the latter years when some of the more talented players that I was involved with, although not directly coaching them, came through and obviously went on to play professional cricket. But I've always measured myself by how much do you know from the bottom to the top of the game. Never be challenged by somebody in a forum where they say, well, what the hell do you know about it? You gave it up 10 years ago. How current are you in terms of your knowledge? And I think that bears fruit in most parts of employment to today. However, I will say, moving on to the next one, is that in 2009, I arrived in Holland. And if I thought Warwickshire was a challenge, then Holland definitely was, because I was the third chief executive in the space of 12 months. That tells you it's turbulent behind the scenes. It was extremely difficult. I was viewed as an outsider. I was the first ever chief executive of a sporting organisation in the Netherlands that was non-Dutch.
And therefore, if I had lots to prove at Warwickshire, I got even more to prove in the Netherlands. Indeed, the first week I was in the job, Kev, I was sat in a meeting with my right-hand man, really, a guy called Alex de la Mar, who'd been there 20, 30 years, a wonderful individual and super knowledgeable at everything in Dutch cricket. And it was with the chairman of the top 6 clubs, what they call the grass wicket clubs. One of the biggest clubs of those 6 is a club called VRA. It's based just outside of Amsterdam, in the Bos, in the forest. And I sat in the meeting. Alex said, "Richard, leave the meeting to me. I'll do the first one, and then we can take it from there." And the purpose of it was to negotiate the venues for the one-day internationals and the various international cricket that we were going to play in the Netherlands for the next 12, 18 months.
Okay, yeah.
And the chairman was a guy called John Worries, an incredibly talented media man, actually, and had come from a stellar background of knowledge of cricket across the Netherlands. And before Alex could open the meeting, John turned to me and he said, "Mr. Cox, thank you very much for your opening email this week," which, Kev, was a welcome and looking forward to meet you email. There was nothing more than that. He said, "If I can just make it absolutely plain and clear to you, Mr. Cox, that we don't want any of your ECB English ideas over here. We've been running cricket as long as you have." And it sat me back in the chair, and I thought, what have I
done here? Have I made the right decision?
And I got to learn and love John as time went along, but immediately, the barriers go up a little bit, and you think, oh, blimey, this is going to be a really difficult first meeting. And obviously it was all conducted in Dutch. At that time, I couldn't speak a word, and I didn't really know what was going on, so I had to judge the whole meeting on body language and the way people intertwined their
tone of voice or something, maybe.
That kind of thing. There I was, sat there in the first week of the job, knowing in John's world that 22 years had been a complete waste of time at Warwickshire, and that I had to turn that around as well. But it was probably, it was a huge leap of faith to change country, change language, change culture, change the side of the road you drive the car on, change diet, change food, change everything, really.
Yeah, it's probably a random question then, but I would think if I was listening to this podcast now, it'd be a question that I'd be shouting at the podcast is, well, what made you do that? Was it because you wanted to better yourself? You've just said how comfortable things were, how well you were doing, with Warwickshire, and you went into this role knowing it would be a challenge, clearly, especially if they'd had so many CEOs in the space. What made you still go for it? What made you stick with it? What was the drive?
Yeah, there's a middle diddle in this. In between Warwickshire and going to Holland, I had a short stint at Bromsgrove School, which is a fantastic school where my own son was actually studying at the time and completed his education there. And Kev, I was employed there as a head of cricket and to do other sports in and around the curriculum and also to help market the school. And there was around about this time of the year, actually, a November day after half term, and I was stood on a touchline of a rugby session. And I didn't know much about rugby, but I knew a bit about coaching. And my own son was in the session. It was a year 8 group at the time. And he was clearly not enjoying rugby, and he doesn't to this day. I do. But you remember the old Blackberries? Do you remember Blackberries?
I do. Not the berries, you mean the phones?
Yeah, the Blackberry phones, yeah. And I was stood on the touchline, watching this PE session, which involved rugby, taking notes on the side, because in 3 or 4 weeks' time, I was going to be taking rugby sessions, because that was the deal, that was the job, and that was the way it was going to go. And it was pouring with rain, Kev, and the water was falling off the tip of my cap onto my nose and onto my training shoes, and I was absolutely soaked, wet through, freezing cold. And my son was in the session, and I got home that night, and I thought, what on earth are you doing? You spent 22 years and probably beyond that. That's working years, let alone, as a youngster in cricket.
All the way through, yeah.
What are you doing? What has made you make this decision to do this? And do you really want to do this? Is this right for the time of life of where you are now? Anyway, coincidentally, I got a phone call from ICC saying there is some ripples of difficulty in the Netherlands at the moment, and we're highly likely to have to, support them with a change of administration. Would you be an interested applicant? And the rest is history.
So the timing, really, then, not that it was purely timing. No doubt you had to go through the process, and your skills and knowledge and everything you'd learned got you the role, but it was timing then, I suppose, that got you then. It's quite funny, actually, that you talk about the rugby, because cricket and rugby were my two sports originally. I'm too old to do either very well now. And, not that I'm a forceful father, well, I don't think I am, but I have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and these days girl rugby is, it's just as good, and quite rightly so, as the men's rugby. But go back a while when my kids were growing up, I was taking them to rugby, and I could see all along, given it was a winter sport in them days, it just wasn't appealing to them. And I think with rugby, you've either got to be in it 100%, and I'm not saying you're not 100% in other stuff, but any small error not to do it, I think people will choose. And I can still relate to what you're saying there about your boy and the weather, and it was probably more you with the weather than him, clearly, but a summer sport and a winter sport, as it would have been in them days, it's very difficult to transition to.
It was a lesson in life for me, really, that the day I left Warwickshire, were going through a restructure at the time, and I was part of that restructure. But I was very fortunate that the following day somebody rang me up from the school, who funnily enough, now he's working at Warwickshire in that academy director role that I was in. A super person, a lad called Paul Greetham, rang me up and said, "Listen, we've got some, a head of cricket role going, but the interviews are tomorrow. Do you want to come?" And I went, and so I've not been unemployed, fortunately, very long in this 30-odd years that I've been in the game. I've been very, very lucky. But then people say that if you've got a job that's your hobby, you never work a day in your life, do you? So
I think work's a huge part of people's life, isn't it? Majority of us can't do anything without that work, and if you can therefore spend majority of your life, or a very large part of your life, in a job you enjoy, I think it just creates your whole life being a much better place. And unfortunately, not everybody's in that boat. So I think that's really good if you can do that, and it just makes everything happier. So look, when you first went to, and it obviously sounds like it was in right turmoil then, the Dutch cricket, obviously, but what were some of the key steps then that you took at the very beginning to help develop the game in the Netherlands?
Some of the steps I think that we had to take was, I learned that you've got to travel a lot, and it wasn't just being in and around the UK, but in order to get it right, the flagship needed to be right, and that was the national team. So it was during my 5 or 6 years there that we turned from amateur to semi-professional to professional. So professionalising the game. What did that mean? It means you've got to bring a lot more money in. We were very well supported by a bank called ABN AMRO at the time, who put millions of euros into the programme for the national team, and that was probably the making of the founding formations of what you see in this Dutch national team to today, really, and the fact that they continue to turn up surprises at World Cups and various events. So that was if we were going to compete, I knew that we couldn't stay as amateur status, and that was a turning point, I think, at the top of the game. At the bottom, I realised I just didn't have the staff, Kev, to be honest.
The backroom staff, or the playing staff, or the...
We didn't have. I walked in the office and we got staff, but they weren't going to grow the game from the base upwards. And when you consider that there's only 17 million people live in Holland, there's around about, or there was at the time, 50 to 60 clubs. Only 6 of them play on grass. And I'd say less than half of those at the time, probably even less than half, had youth players. Where was the future going to be? So we restructured the staff, as you would tend to do, and appointed some youth development officers. I was very fortunate to have Roland Lefebvre as a performance manager who played first-class cricket for Glamorgan. Yeah. And Somerset, of course, and obviously played in the national Dutch side. So we had known each other from the past. and a guy called Peter Drin, an Australian who I'd known for quite some time, as well as national coach. So that was in a good place. But the bit underneath about the development of club cricket and youth development, we didn't have the professional staff in place, so that had to change. And then I go back to the power of the clubs there. There was an inordinate amount of power within the cricket clubs in the Netherlands, as there is in a lot of European countries. And they hold the whip hand in many things. So making sure that, they were on message a lot of the time was a full-time job when I look back at it, let alone me coping with, as I said before, the language and the culture
barrier, the cultural differences.
From home. I think most of the 5-6 years I was there, the least number of flights I did in a year was 70 odd, something like that. And that was, either back and forth to the UK, because we went into what was called the Clydesdale Bank 40 competition during that period, CB 40 for short, which was the English professional games 40 over comp. And we were in it, Scotland were in it, and Ireland were in it. So it was, there was a lot of travel during that period of time, but I loved it. I absolutely loved. And in terms of, being a chief executive of a country, it is a true privilege, and again, it was a massive layer of learning for me. So, but time to come home happens to everyone. I think 5 or 6 years is in an overseas job of that nature is probably about right. Any less, you probably can't go through enough cycles of.
I agree with you about the overseas thing being different, but again, everybody has difference of opinions. But I think any job that you want to be successful in will have a limited time. Now, you could say, well, I've been in my, somebody's listening saying, well, I've been in my job 25 years and I'm still doing a very good job, and I must be doing, because I get all that. That's great. But in jobs where you need to be inventive or think differently or move with times or have different views, you've got to go elsewhere sometimes to bring different views in. So for me, 5 or 6 years in any job is your optimum time to be effective, I suppose. But it makes sense. But it sounds like it was a really difficult thing, and I think from what you're saying there, then, Richard, is that for the playing staff, so to speak, to improve and become better and more engaged, there was a bit of back office stuff that needed doing in the first place. And look, we'll take a 10-second break, but when we come back, we'll talk about how that helped you then moving forward and bringing that experience back, as you say, when you moved on from there, and what you did with it. And we'll go on to some more coaching elements. So we'll be back after this short break. You are listening to the podcast Bats, Balls and Banter. Please like, subscribe and share with your fellow enthusiasts. Hey, don't forget to leave a review, and your support keeps the banter going. So, welcome back, and we've just gone through a couple of sections there about your journey from the Royal Dutch Cricket Board and ECB and your coaching, and then how you moved there, and how you were developing Dutch cricket, really, and some of the steps that you had to take and what challenges you had. But what we didn't cover was some of the highlights. It wasn't all doom and gloom. There must have been some really good highlights during that session.
Yeah, there was, Kev. I think if I go back to the Warwickshire bit, I think ECB, England and Wales Cricket Board, for those listeners that don't understand the term ECB, but it's the national governing body of cricket in the UK. They developed 4 levels of coaching. Previously, there'd only been 3 levels of coaching, and they added a 4th around about 2002, something like that, I think it was. So I suppose a highlight for me was I was the first ever Warwickshire level 4 coach that came off the production line and completed it, and it is quite a tricky and difficult qualification to get. In fact, I think it attained graduate status at one point from the University of Gloucestershire. You could get a combined degree with it if you've got that what's now called the master coach. So I really enjoyed doing that and being the first one off the production line, and still we'll come to coaching perhaps a little bit further in this chat. But after that was growing a team at Warwickshire. I started out as a one-man band as a cricket development officer, all on my own, and when I finished there, we got something like 10 full-time employees and, 200 or 300 part-time employees and volunteers and that, so on and so forth. And then I suppose the third thing would be that latter part of working with Warwickshire as Academy Director, watching the likes of Moeen Ali, Chris Wokes, Ian Bell, and many others come not through to first-class cricket, but then go on and play Test cricket. And although I wasn't their go-to coach by any way, shape, or form, having a hand in their journey and watching, them move through those
through the stages and next.
Yeah, it was, and all three of them such different characters as well, and seeing them all of them get to the top and wear the three lions, knowing that within those three characters is always a different way of reaching the top, and that taught me an awful lot. So
yeah, I can imagine three different characters, as you say, in different styles of play, different format, and different abilities in different disciplines as well. Yeah. So
I think the Dutch highlight would be probably. Interestingly, knowing that my father, who's no longer alive, but would have seen that and would have been so proud as the ultimate challenge. So something I probably did for family recognition, like you, probably steeped in family history and cricket and all that kind of thing. So that would be the soft element of working in the Netherlands, but the business side of it was that the balance sheet wasn't great when I started there, and we were struggling. We were worried.
Yeah.
I think that was why they'd had so many departures and changes. That stabilised and grew to, sizable reserves, and watching that being able to be ploughed back into the game. But also that Dutch thing gave me an opportunity to get out of the ECB bubble. Because all I knew at that stage was Warwickshire and the UK. I'd travelled an awful lot and played and coached overseas, but to actually get your fingers dirty and behind the scenes, it taught me an awful lot about ICC politics, but also it gave me an opportunity to keep the tracksuit on as well. I did quite a bit of coaching while I was there, so
not purely sat behind a desk in the office.
Not really, no.
So that goes back to that, just broadening your horizon and knowledge in different elements, which I suppose, in my view, is a really good thing, and then enables you to push on to the next stage, whatever that may be. So you've now brought all that experience back to the UK then. So how did that help you? Approach when you returned?
I think it was about 2015, and the time was right for everybody to make the change, as I just said before the break. And an opportunity came up in a minor county, they're now called national counties, called Shropshire, which is the second largest inland county in the country. It's a massive expanse. And an opportunity came up there, and it's interesting. There's a thread here. They were into some financial trouble, a little bit of financial trouble, and asked me, would I be interested again in applying, and when would I be back in the UK? And so I spent a very joyful 18 months there, and thankfully they pulled it round, or we pulled it round with a flourishing business, and they're now doing really, really well. So I've got a huge soft spot for the development of the game in Shropshire. And then ECB, that came around about 2018, and I spent four years with ECB up until COVID. So always working with your national governing body's got to be a proud moment.
Absolutely.
I think, and everybody that works in cricket. If I tell you there's something like 940 people working cricket in this country now on a professional basis. That's not players and people working at county cricket clubs, by the way. That's administration staff, coaches that are growing and developing the game. It's always wonderful to be part of, seeing behind the scenes of the way the governing body grows. And so I'm very privileged to work there. But then COVID came along, and like it did to many people, again, we found ourselves in a situation of restructure and time to do something else. So, but I'm still in touch and very, very closely involved with ECB, because I do work on their level 3 and level 4 program for coach development.
Yeah,
so
I was going to say,
I really left the place, to be honest.
So you're just not employed by them, but still employed by them effectively in different guises, really. But yeah, I mean, I 100% agree, and again, it goes back to earlier about the conversation. If you're in a job that you love, it just makes things, I think, much more palatable in the fact that you're going to work, and therefore not only in a sport that you love, but being part of that governing body that's making decisions or next steps and improving it and driving it forward, I think should be a beautiful place to be in, really. So is this where the Blind Summit coaching, training, management came in?
It did, really. It's the COVID came, and again, there was as I just said, there was a restructure with ECB, and it came as a result of I applied for some roles within ECB. I was successful, but then they took around about 14 weeks to make their mind up whether I was staying or going. It was quite draining, to be honest. I have to say, for many of us, a lot of people became ill through that process. And I went outside of cricket. Actually, I went to work in a school, which I still work in to this day, leading a COVID testing centre because everybody was shut down behind closed doors. So I did that for 4 months. And then the cricket season started, and the sniff of mown grass and get the tracks.
I soon lured you back.
And so Blind Summit, Kev, came out of a road sign, to be honest. So if you're driving up a hill in the UK and you can't see over the top of the hill, there'll be a triangular sign with a red rim and an exclamation mark, which is basically telling you that, to be careful, there's something on the other side. So the idea of Blind Summit to me came out of all these experiences that I've had, that I could help people get over the other side. I'd probably been there. I'd probably come back again. I'd faced adversity. I'd faced triumph. I'd been extremely lucky. But there are a number of people out there that didn't know what lay ahead for them, that were unsure about what lies over the hill. And could I, in some way form a company around my business, around management of cricket administration and particularly coaching? And out of that came Blind Summit. And so that's a very small business, small part of what I do. Because on the other hand, I had the fortunate position of being involved with my own cricket club, West Bromwich Dartmouth Cricket Club, and they were in need of help and support. And at the time, they said, "Can you come and help us as well?" So I had 2 part-time jobs, and it enabled me to take a breath, really, and see where I wanted to go. And if you'd have said to me after all the experiences that I would be sort of part-time this, part-time that, part-time the other, I'd have said, "You're joking, I like a salary at the end of the month, I like stability, I think I'm okay at what I do." But now here I was, going from day to day, and actually it's been hugely exciting to see the things that can happen once you, again, push yourself into different forms of employment and different challenges. I would never have done that, I don't think. And what made me believe in it? I suppose going to Holland. I thought if I could go to Holland and survive all of that and come to terms with it and do a decent job, which I hope I did there, then why wouldn't I be able to do something set up on my own and back myself? And it's just having the belief, really. So anybody that's out there thinking they're a bit miffed with their job and do I go on my own and should I try it or should I don't? I'm the archetypal steady job, salary at the end of the month person. If I can do it, anybody can do it. So I'd absolutely encourage people to go and look out there and see what else that you can challenge yourself with. And it's unbelievable where it takes you.
Yeah, and I think that I've talked about it in some previous podcasts. I did one with my brother. I'm not sure if it's released yet, but that ended up being split over 2 parts because we had lots to talk about, and we are completely different characters. If you saw us, you'd probably think, there's a similarity in looks, but that's probably where it ends. Where I'm let's dive in, let's give it a go. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Let's see what comes. And he's very, very much the other way, very risk averse. You know, you got to think it through. It's probably got to be on 5 spreadsheets. He's got to work it all out. He'll then go away and think about it. And 9 times out of 10, by the time he's sort of made a decision, it's passed by anyway. And I think, I don't know, I'm probably bold in saying this, but he's 4 years older than me, so he'll be 60 next year. Has only ever had 2 jobs in his life, because he is a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, very risk averse. Thank you very much indeed. I get paid. There's nothing to worry about. Whereas I'm completely the other way, and I don't know. I've probably had more jobs than the job centre over the years, because I want to improve myself, I suppose, really. But it's a really good point that you make. You know, lots of people get bogged down, get involved, and think, I just can't do it. I can't do it. What I would say is, would you have done it with your Blind Summit if you hadn't had those other experiences, like you've referred to? You know, the Dutch cricket, which spanned all sorts of elements of cricket. If you'd have been in a Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, getting your pay packet, everything's happy, would you have still gone and done it? And I think that's the difference. You'd got some backing in your own mind behind you because of your experiences prior to that.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, there were some wobbly times where people would, trip out, oh, you'll be absolutely fine, you've been in the game a long time, you know loads of people, you're good at what you do. But the world has changed immeasurably, as we all know. Cultural diversity has changed immeasurably. And I was in a time in my life where I thought, well, this is quite a risk, I'm not 25 and single and, the world's in front of me. The world's behind me in many ways. Yeah. So
you've now got responsibilities and liabilities.
Yeah. But there were a number of people that one person said to me, when you go through adversity like this, it's not, you don't have to go and have a coffee with 100 people. You just have to pick out 10 people that you think have got another 10 people that are really influential, and that's the way you find your 100. And I went and spoke to a lot of people about what I was thinking of doing, 10 what I would call influencers, and I would say 8 out of the 10 said go for it. And one of the reasons they said was that A, you've got experience behind you, B, you've got some pedigree in the game as well, which obviously helps. But C, you've got the drive and the energy to do it. Although you're the age you are, you've still got a massive amount of drive in it. And then it came down to 3 things when I was speaking to people, and this sounds awfully ruthless, but it's absolutely true, or it proved true for me. But when I was going to speak to people about how I developed the business and how I gained money at the end of the day, 3 things needed to come into play. The first one was, am I talking to a decision maker? Because if I'm not going to get very far. Secondly, has he got a budget? In other words, is there going to be capacity for me to gain work in this? Or will it be, we can probably do something in 12 months' time? And thirdly, is there an opportunity? And if the people I was talking to didn't have all those 3 things, then it was highly likely that Blind Summit wouldn't have gone the way that it did, and indeed some of the other things I've been involved in. But I only discovered that by stealth, because you can spend a lot of time having a lot of coffees with a lot of people and following it up, only to realise that you've wasted another £5 on coffees because it's actually not going to go anywhere. And not all of the drinks and not all of the chats that you need to hit those criteria. Absolutely they don't, because there's some wonderful people out there that can't adhere to those 3 things. But I happened on that pretty quickly after about 2 months, I reckon, of coming out of being on Wales Cricket Board, that those 3 things are critical, and they're critical in life and in business.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, those 3 things that you've said really is a bit of a set. Over the years, I've been a high-level sales and leading teams, etc., etc. And those 3 things would be one of the first 3 things I'd say to any aspiring salesperson. Now, what you're doing here is you're selling yourself, so it's still the same thing. But, why is this guy going to buy anything? Why is he going to buy it now? And why me then? And if you can answer those 3 questions, you're not wasting people's time. It may not all come at least you've then got a funnel, haven't you? If the guy says, I have got a budget, I am looking at doing it now, but we've just got this, this and this, so can we meet in September? Absolutely. Yeah. It's in the diary for September. What you're not doing is forecasting it now and thinking, oh, next week I might get that, then, and then you know where that sits in your funnel and you know who else you've got to speak to. So I think, as you've just said, those three elements, I think, are very important in lots of parts of life, really. But it's definitely a sales technique, and that's what you're doing. You're selling yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And did that make a difference to you then, do you think, the fact that you sort of was ruthless, as you say, to use your word? I don't think it is, personally, but your word there was you was ruthless.
Yeah,
do you think that helped you and saved time?
It sounds useless, but it made me use my time profitably.
Yeah.
And develop, a business plan such that when you're with people, you try to look at it if you were sat in their shoes. And the three things I used to ask myself in those meetings were, why am I relevant here? Am I going to be relevant to this decision maker? Why am I actually here? Does he or she know and understand? And why am I valuable to them? And if you've got those three things in your mind, then I think you can develop any business. But it definitely was a corner, because I was learning. A lot of people, if you remember, had lost their jobs during that period.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you, do you think...
There were a lot of people searching for answers.
Yeah.
I just happened to stumble on it maybe quicker than I expected to, I suppose.
Oh, no, well, that was going to lead me into another question, actually, and all that work that you did of the why, sort of budget, now, me, definite, etc., etc. Do you think, looking back, that the particular state of the world, so to speak, at that particular time, was it back in 2022, was it? I think I can't remember.
Yeah, it was 21.
Yeah. Do you think that helped you progress? Do you think people were coming out of that and thinking, right, well, we need to get going again, we need to kickstart, this is the time? Did that help you, do you think?
I think it definitely did, and it kept a sharp mind for me. And actually, I quickly realised that there would be other cricket opportunities once we got through this horrific period that everybody suffered from. And it was around about 2022 I got approached by Hertfordshire Cricket, which is where I work now, saying, I think we've got a bit of a problem, Houston. Please can we discuss it a bit more? And that was simply that they'd been called to a meeting with ECB asking about their future viability. So there's that common thread again about, are you set up correctly? Do you have the financial acumen to continue as a business? And I'm very fortunate to be asked in an informal chat one day if I could help them out a little bit, a couple of days a week, and that also went from there.
I'd like to come on to that in a minute. We'll just take us a short break, Richard, but I'd like to come on to that, because that's the next sort of thing that we're leading into there. Obviously, you taking the lead officer for Hertfordshire Cricket, and then I want to talk about your we've talked about the Netherlands, but that was, in my mind, and you can put me correct, more than an emerging nation. They'd emerged, they just probably didn't know then how to kick on. So if we take a 10-second break, and then we can talk about your role in Hertfordshire Cricket, but then I think really if we can dive in a little bit into developing cricket in the emerging nations.
Absolutely, pleasure.
So we're splitting this conversation into two parts to keep each one around our usual 40-minute length. There's a lot to cover, and we want to keep it engaging and manageable for our listeners. So we hope you enjoyed part 1, and be sure to catch part 2 soon. This podcast series is sponsored by Cricket Finder, the world's fastest growing cricket networking platform, bringing clubs, teams and players together from all over the world. Use the code POD24 to receive your subscription discount at cricketfinder.com. So thank you all for tuning in to Bats, Balls and Banter. And don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more exciting episodes. Until next time, take care and keep the cricket spirit alive.